Let's talk about reverb, and this is going to be part one where I'm going to briefly explain how a reverb works and use a very, very simple reverb unit, just so as I can explain what the different functions are. First off, let's talk about what a reverb actually is. A reverb is simply a collection of echoes. One echo can be deemed as reverb. In fact, the echo effect itself is, in effect, a delay that has something like a 40 millisecond pre-delay time. Don't worry about that, I'm just throwing that in so you can kind of remember it. Maybe we'll come back to it later. But basically how it works, reverb is simply the direct sound that leaves either your mouth, microphone, keyboard, whatever, and bounces around the room. We call that a reflection. Each bounce is a reflection. So let's just say we are dealing with vocals. Let's just pretend the microphone is actually generating the sound the same as a speaker would. Let's say our first reflection hits here. It will then go here. In this instance, it's reflecting off this keyboard, back there, back to that. But that's as simplistic as you get. It will, in effect, jump around the whole room until it comes back to you. The distance between the first reflection and what we call the direct sound, which will be the dry sound, is called the pre-delay. In effect, that is when the reverb will start. If you're in a big room and it takes a while for your voice to carry across that room and bounce off whatever the first reflective surface is, usually it'll be the ground or the ceiling or the walls, the time it takes for the first reflection to actually take place is called the pre-delay. And I can best explain that to you with a graph I drew in the same book that will explain to you how these reflections behave. When the audio comes in here, it goes through a pre-delay. That is the time it takes for the reverb to kick in. This area will be dry. The first reflection, as I explained in the other diagram, is what I judge my pre-delay to be by. After the first reflection, you'll have a ton of early reflections. And then they will start to amass, collect, sum, clash, and do all manner of stuff. The dissipation of that reverb is what we call the decay time. So if you're, let's say, in a cathedral and you say hello, this dissipation, decay time, or what we call the reverb tail, will be considerably longer. In a smaller room, these will get shorter and shorter and shorter. So we now have a basic understanding of a reverb, a collection of echoes, with pre-delay being the first echo, the early reflections being the immediate echoes that follow, and a lot of good reverb units will separate this section from the decay section, which is what we call the reverb itself. Let me show you. I'm loading Isotope's reverb simply because it is so simple to understand. Let's first play it, bypassed, and I'm using Becky's vocals again. I'll turn it down a touch here so that you can hear me talking.
Tempted by the prize, still up near dawn, young but behind your eyes. So
we've used this vocal before. It's from David and Becky and it's wonderful, and I've used it in a number of the tutorials. Right, let's get this going now. Early reflections. Let's put all of these out. Put the wet mix up, I don't know, about there. Let's bring the dry mix to about there. And then we'll start with the pre-delay. But first, I have actually selected no pre-delay here. And I've selected room as my mode because it'll be the smallest space from all these selections. These are pretty much standard reverb rooms or topologies. Topology being something like a plate. If you look in the book and get to the later chapters, you'll find out what a plate is and how it behaves and how the reverb of a plate is created. For now, let's stick to room. Let's play Becky's vocals. So if I lower the decay value, let me again lower the voice here. This is the length of the reverb.
so old and worn.
So at 0.25, it's almost as if Becky's standing in front of me in a, an ambient room. Now let's look at our first reflections, which are the reflections immediately after the pre-delay. Good reverb units will separate the two because you could actually have a decay time with just a reverb instead of early reflections, or vice versa. Now, if I've selected this and put my pre-delay on 0, it actually means the reverb starts immediately. So that doesn't give us any impression of the space that we're actually in, because we don't have a distance to any walls or reflective surfaces. But look what happens when I put it up here. I can now hear Becky's dry voice, then the reverb.
So old and worn, tempted by the
If I draw that back down,
still up near dawn,
it's just reverb.
young, but behind your torn, tempted by the prize.
It starts much later. Now watch what happens, or listen to what happens when I switch to bigger spaces.
Still up near dawn, young, but behind your torn,
And different textures, bearing in mind that's a plate.
still up near dawn, young, but behind your torn, tempted by the prize. Still up near dawn.
Now let's talk about, let me get rid of the early reflections, just stick up a decay time and put this here. Now let's talk about low decay. That's quite nice actually, which acts as an accumulation of the type of frequencies we want. So for example, on the high decay, this just adjusts how the high frequencies decay. This adjusts how the low frequencies decay. This is a combination of the dry or just the reverb. Width is a stereo spread, which allows us to make the reverb wider. That's nice. Maybe just a little more here and bring that down a touch. This is just how it crossfades between left and right. That's pretty much it for now for this. Now I'm going to use tone boosters reverb, which I have to say is probably one of the smoothest reverbs I've ever come across, and I think it's only like $20–30. Forget the T60 for now. That's an algorithm that they've instigated here. It's really about matching volumes and levels and so on. I just take it as reverb tail. This is exactly the same as the isotope wet and dry mix. Frequency damping, forget character for now, but frequency damping is in effect applying different types of high pass and low pass, or even in some instances you can combine the two and create a band pass. The idea is to take the edge off very bright reverbs. Some rooms will exhibit some pretty nasty excitation on the reverbs, and maybe you just want to smooth that down. In other instances, your low end might be too boomy, and you'll get that a lot with reverb, so we tend to cut the low end down. Some of the better reverbs unit will have what we call multipliers, which can be used either in positive or negative mode to multiply the low end or reduce the low end. Pre-delays, as we spoke of, width is stereo width, ER level is early reflections level, same as the isotone fader that I dragged all the way up. Shape is about the shape of the room. All the reverbs will have their own ranges for shape. Some will start with a cubed room and go all the way to, I don't know, an octagon or something like that. Some will start with a circle or a square and move up to, I don't know, cathedral size, whatever. Pick the shape of the room you want. Remember that circular rooms will give you a completely different flavor of reverb to rectangular shaped rooms. Size is in effect the equivalent of picking room, hall, cathedral, arena. Diffusion is important. The higher the diffusion value, the denser the reverb effect. If you want that nice airy sparse effect, less diffusion. High pass, low pass filters at the output stage, so we can cut out rumbles and, like I said, the exaggerated brightness. Character, again, play around with it. It's going to be predetermined algorithms to reshape the reverb, and you just select the one you want. Let's just play with Becky's verb here.
And young, but behind your horn, tempted by the prize, still up near dawn. Young, but behind your horn, tempted by the prize.
Huge difference between those shape and this shape, or these shapes. Listen to how the reverb just extends when I change size. And now diffusion. That's made the reverb considerably thicker. Character, very subtle. Let's leave this out for now so I can use the high pass and the low pass. All you are hearing now is both the direct signal and the reverb thinned out. And the reason you're hearing that is because I'm using it as an insert effect. If I use this as an auxiliary, this would behave differently. And so would these, because these would only high and low pass the reverb as opposed to the direct signal. Sorry, I've kept the fader down, but I really don't want it blowing your eardrums while I'm talking. So we've looked at two different reverbs. We covered the most important aspects, which is pre-delay, early reflections, the reverb decay time itself, the size, and diffusion. Those to me are the most important. Everything else comes later to shape the actual reverb. So your band passing and your frequency damping and characters are simply about shape.